I jumped from an airplane with my parachute, but it did not open, downwards did I scoot. I was kind of nervous, many a hasty prayer made. I was breaking wind too, like a Dyson airblade, when suddenly flew up to me a man from Mars below. We met halfway and paused to say a very brief hello. I said, friend, do you know about parachutes? He said, no. Do you know anything about gas ovens? That's the sort of thing you're in for the next hour. Hello, I'm Colin Sell. I just mentioned that for those of you who don't know what I actually look like, because if you know my name at all, you probably know it from a silly radio show called I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. And of course, it's a radio show, so I don't get seen. And after recording one of the shows, somebody came up to me afterwards and he said, I thought you'd be fatter. I don't know how you can tell from the way that somebody plays the piano, whether they're fat or thin or tall or short. Excuse me, but there you are. Anyway, this is really about my interest in comedy, in music and comedy. And I'd like to say, first of all, I'm going to start at the very beginning, which is a long time ago. But when I was a little lad, my parents had some George Formby records. And although I was too small to really understand every saucy innuendo, I did rather enjoy singing along with them. So this is the beginning, really, of my sort of influences, if you like. I've expurgated them a little bit because he could get a little bit ripe. But this is called Auntie Maggie's Homemade Remedy. It's guaranteed never to fail. That's the stuff that will do the trick. It's sold in every chemist for 1 and a gig. Now, if the baby starts crying, there's always a reason. And if you inspect him, you'll see. Ah, poor little chappie, I've covered his nappy and Auntie Maggie's remedy. I went to the doctor, I didn't feel well. He made me lie on the settee. He said, there's trouble brewing. You've been overdoing your Auntie Maggie's remedy. Oh, Auntie Maggie's homemade remedy. It's guaranteed never to fail. That's the stuff that will do the trick. It's sold in every chemist for 1 and a kick. Into a young lady's bedroom I went by mistake. My intentions were honest, you see. She shouted with laughter, I know what you're after. It's your Auntie Maggie's remedy. Now if you set your alarm clock for 8 in the morning, you're bound to wake up, I agree. But I bet you by heaven, you'll wake up at 7 with Auntie Maggie's remedy. Turned out nice again. So that was George Formby, and that was a really good way, I think, of getting into comedy songs, even though I was too young to understand everything that was going on in the lyrics. Of course, the song was much longer than that. He wrote yards and yards of verses. He also wrote a very popular song called My Little Stick of Blackpool Rock, which the BBC thought was too rude to play, so they didn't put it out on the radio, which rather disappointed George until he discovered that the rest of the nation had rushed out and bought copies of the record. So in fact, he made more money from the record sales than he would have done if it had been played on the radio. The radio in the 1950s, that was a great treat. Comedy on the radio, it was a golden age, and I just loved it. You knew as soon as you heard some of those signature tunes, you were in for a very good time for the next half hour. You know, old tunes like this. The older ones among you may remember that. Hancock's Half Hour. This one, On the Celeste, very high up. Take It From Here. They just broadcast, don't they, before the show even starts. This is going to be fun. It's a wonderful sort of resonance. So many years later, of course, when I started to play for I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, it was great to know that we had a very good signature tune for that, and it's still going. And it goes... Why we chose it, I don't know. It was nothing to do with me. It was chosen before I joined the show. But it's very strange. It starts off with Deutschland über alles, but there we are. But it does have, I think, the same sort of resonance as some of those old signature tunes. So when we introduced Samantha, our scorer, to the show, I had to suddenly come up with a little signature tune for her, which I hoped will be equally memorable and would kind of give the picture of this beautiful woman standing up and giving us a bit of a twirl, as Bruce Forsyth used to say. So I didn't have any time to think about it, really. I was just told to come up with something. And this is what I came up with for Samantha. And I never wrote it down, and it stayed with me ever since. And that's always been Samantha's signature tune. There's a sort of connection between Samantha and George Formby in a very odd way, because they both deal in smutty references, if you like. George Formby was an expert at it. And our chairman, Humphrey Lyttelton and now Jack Dee, are often producing these smutty comments about Samantha. And I must make a distinction here between smut and filth. Smut really is where people have a predisposed mind to actually understand what is being said. And I think, therefore, people who email in and write in and complain about the way we speak about Samantha have kind of got it wrong. I think it's all in the mind of the listener. Anyway, that's another matter for another day. So, Samantha. Humphrey Lyttelton, of course, when he was our chairman, was a wonderful trumpeter and a band leader. So I must tell you this little story. He was playing with his band one night. At the end of the gig, as they call them, a man came up to him looking terribly serious and saying, "Mr. Lyttelton," he said, "may I ask you a question in strictest confidence?" And Hump said, "Oh dear, wish you can," thinking perhaps he didn't like the music, but not at all. The man said, "Mr. Lyttelton," he said, "do Colin and Samantha really exist?" And Samantha and Hump said, as a sort of joke, he said, "Well, Samantha does." And the man went away and believed him perfectly happily. So there we are. Perhaps I'm not really here, just virtual all over again. I was about, I think, 7 or 8 years old when I was introduced to a show called At the Drop of a Hat. Friends of ours had a recording of it. And At the Drop of a Hat had the dream team from heaven, really, writing funny songs. Donald Swann at the piano, who wrote the music. Michael Flanders, in a wheelchair, because he had polio, wrote the words. And they just sat on the stage together and they performed these songs. Originally, they'd written all these songs for reviews in the 1940s and 50s. And then they discovered that they had a potential between the two of them to perform them on their own. So there they were at the Fortune Theatre. Cheers, looks like water, doesn't it? And then the next year, they went to the Haymarket Theatre, a much bigger theatre, and they did their next show At the Drop of Another Hat, which my parents took me to. And of course, that was an absolutely wonderful evening. So I just like to really have a look at a couple of their songs. I think it's interesting how these songs get written. The first one was written because Michael Flanders and Donald Swann were writing songs for a review being put on by Laurier Lister, who, as it happens, was my first employer in the theatre, but that's another matter. He had a beautiful backdrop painted of a scene on the beach in the south of France, right? And he got nothing to put in front of it. It seemed a rather strange thing to do. It's kind of the tail wagging the dog, really, isn't it? You think you get the act or the song first and then have the backdrop painted. But anyway, so he said to Michael and Donald, he said, "Could you put together some little song to put in front of this lovely backdrop of this scene in the south of France?" So sort of more or less overnight, Michael and Donald came up with this song. It's called Rain on the Plage. Now, linguists among you will be interested to know that in the second verse, there is the title of a popular film at the time, translated into French. Here we go, anyway. When it's raining on the plage, there is water everywhere. Can this be the Riviera? It's more like a riviere. What we send on hot potage, we shall save on ombre solaire. But it might have been plus sage to have found some other plage, such as Bournemouth or Swanage, back in sunny Angleterre. When it's raining on the plage, there is nowhere else to go. All the cinemas are showing Passeport à Pimlico. They have packed up our bagage and we're waiting for the train. As they wish us bon voyage, we'll murmur quel dommage, une si jolie petite plage, if it wasn't for the rain. The rain. The rain. Flanders and Swann. Not a big laugh number, a nice smiley number. This is one of their stronger laughing numbers, and whether I can make you laugh with it, I don't know, but I like it anyway. 'Twas on a Monday morning, the gas man came to call. The gas tap wouldn't turn, I wasn't getting gas at all. He couldn't reach the skirting board without pulling out the main, and I had to call the carpenter to put it back again. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on a Tuesday morning, the carpenter came round. He hammered and he chiselled and he said, look what I found. Your joists are full of dry rot, but I'll put them all to rights. And he nailed right through a cable, and out went all the lights. So it all makes work for a working man to do. 'Twas on a Wednesday morning, the electrician came. He called me Mr. Sellers, which isn't quite my name. He couldn't reach the fuse box without standing on the bin. And his foot went through a window, so I called the glazier in. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on a Thursday morning, the glazier came along with his blowtorch and his putty and his merry glazier song. He put another pane in, it took no time at all. And I had to call the painter in to come and paint the wall. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. 'Twas on a Friday morning, the painter made a start. With undercoats and overcoats, he painted every part, every nook and every cranny. But I found when he was gone, he painted over the gas tap and I couldn't turn it on. Oh, it all makes work for the working man to do. On Saturday and Sunday, they do no work at all. So 'twas on the Monday morning that the gas man came to call. A song still relevant today, I think. Other people who wrote comedy songs who influenced me very strongly, people like Tom Lehrer and so on, and somebody whose songwriting perhaps has been rather forgotten now unjustly, was Bill Oddie. He wrote a very funny song, very witty, using styles and voices and so on, every week for I'm Sorry I'll Read That Again. And they were just terrific. I was very, very impressed by those. Somebody else I liked very much at this period was Paddy Roberts. Not, again, a name which is particularly remembered now, but Paddy Roberts in the 1950s, when he in fact was about in his 50s really, he became quite a big name in cabaret and sort of low dives and clubs and so on, singing and playing his own songs. He'd started off as a pop songwriter. He'd written a song called Softly, Softly, which became a big hit at the beginning of the 50s. But later on, he started to write songs which were really sort of satirizing the sexual mores of young people. Anyway, this is a song that he wrote, which I'm rather fond of. It's called I Love Mary. I love Mary, sweet little blue-eyed Mary, warm and glowing as an autumn sky. Dear, dear Mary, never a bit contrary, and I'll love her till the day I die. But I'm going out with a blousy old tramp called Sadie. She's right on the ball, though she's not what you call a lady. But she's twice as rich as Croesus, sleeps in golden fleeces. And when I see the dough, my principles go to pieces. I'm weak in the head when it comes to the ready money. Just rattle the tin and I go into my dance. And though I love Mary, pretty little Mary, Mary doesn't stand a chance. Oh, I've got a date with a crabby old crane called Sadie. Got a face like a cart, and believe me, she's not a lady. As a beauty, she's a steamer, but I keep my sense of humour. I can stomach the lot as long as she's got that old Azuma. So I put out the cat and I do this and that for Sadie. And if I keep my health, I shall end up a wealthy man. And though I love Mary, pretty little Mary, Mary doesn't suit my plan. Mary's just an also-ran. Yeah. So that was I Love Mary. Of course, you can't really talk about English comedy songs without mentioning Noel Coward. And this is a song by Noel Coward that he wrote for Beatrice Lillie. I'll come back to Beatrice Lillie in a moment. But he wrote it in about 1953, at the sort of the height of the revue period. And it was written really to be performed in revue. It wasn't from one of his musicals or operettas or anything like that. So you have to imagine for this, excuse me again, imagine, if you will, that I am a medieval lady. I'm wearing a long medieval frock and I've got one of those sort of medieval headdresses on, and I'm sitting at a spinning wheel. Here at my spinning wheel I stay. The robin sings ho on the orchard bough. Where is my love who rode away? Where be he now? Where be he now? Winter comes and then the spring. I weave and weave and weave and weave. I've worked for a dear on a coat for my dear, and I've not yet finished the sleeve. Here at my spinning wheel I stay. My bobbin goes click, clack, click, clack. I've got my warp caught up my woof, and I can't get the bloody thing back. So that's what Noel Coward wrote for Beatrice Lillie. Just like to mention Beatrice Lillie because she was a very, very big hit at the time. And I think, again, now she's perhaps rather forgotten. She was very tall, very imposing looking, very long face. She was a little bit like a cross between Joyce Grenfell and Larry Grayson, if you can somehow get the picture. And the great thing about B. Lillie was that she had no fear of the audience whatsoever. She was quite bold and quite brazen. And on one occasion, she was in a review and the curtain rose and there she stood in the middle of the stage, very statuesque, very still, in a very, very beautiful, long evening dress, right down to the floor. And she stood there and she sang Come Into the Garden, Maud, which was a very old sort of turn of the 20th century parlour song. No jokes in it at all. And the audience got very restless because it's quite a long song. And they thought, what's happened to B. Lillie? Where are the jokes? Where's the fun in all this? Then she got to the end of the song and she finished. She hoiked up her skirt and she roller skated off the stage. I think that shows a great deal of bravery. I think, as I mentioned about Rain on the Plage, finding out how songs were written in the first place is often quite instructive. This one came out of desperation. And this is what happened. Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II were writing the score for a show in 1929. It was called Sweet Adeline, and it starred Helen Morgan. Now, Helen Morgan was a wonderful performer in musical theatre, but she wasn't an easy lady to work with, and she kept arguing about her lyrics for her songs. So Oscar Hammerstein was being kept very busy rewriting lyrics. So Jerome Kern had got the song for the second female lead. He got the tune, but he hadn't got the words, and he was getting very frustrated waiting for Oscar Hammerstein to get his stuff together. So he said to the woman who was playing this secondary lead, whose name was Irene Franklin, he said, Irene Franklin, he said, I've got the tune for your song, but I haven't got the words. Yeah. So would you fancy putting them together yourself? Now, Irene Franklin, who, as far as I know, had never written a lyric in her life, said, yes, I'll have a go at that. And she did. And this is what she came up with. Again, I'm being a woman. There once lived a wonderful woman. A marvelous woman was she. She cooked like an angel, made all her own clothes. At 4 every morning this paragon rose. She played the piano and cello and scrubbed up the kitchen each day. She sang like a dove and she wasn't above taking in refined washing, they say. She was my husband's first wife, my husband's first wife. She never was cranky, she'd come when you'd call, and the house ran on nothing at all. So he tells me, my husband's first wife, my husband's first wife. She hated bicycling, it gave her no thrill. She never went out and she never was ill. And oh, how I wish the dear girl were here still. My husband's first wife. My husband's first wife. My husband's first wife. She sang as she brought up the coal every morn, and she mentioned vacations with scorn. So he tells me, my husband's first wife, my husband's first wife. Her figure was lovely, just 18 she looked. The children were cleaned and their French lessons booked. They were born in the morning, but dinner was cooked by my husband's first wife. I think that's a lovely song, that. I think that's a cracker. What a wonderful lyric to come up with. Anyway, it's also one of those songs that you think, oh, well, I wish I'd thought of that one. There we are. It is gone. There comes a point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid, where I have to play you songs of my own. This first one has always been quite kind to me. It's called The Boys and the Band, and it's a little bit pro-y, but as I think most people watching are a little bit pro-y anyway, you'll probably get the joke. If you know anything about theatre musicians, this one is for you. I wrote it a long, long time ago, back in the 1970s, for a review, a late night review we did at the old Marlow Theatre in Canterbury. Hands up if you still remember the old Marlow Theatre in Canterbury, which was, of course, a converted cinema. And we did a little late night show amongst the company, and it was called Mrs. Worthington, You Were Warned, which is all about being in the theatre, which all sounds a little bit in and a bit indulgent. But actually, it was a rather good show. And I wrote the songs, and Wendy Murray wrote the script and starred in it. And I was detailed to write a song more or less sort of in the car journey down to Canterbury one day about theatre musicians. And so this is it, Boys in the Band. And I normally, in performance, I preface this with a joke about drummers. Now, drummers have a very bad press, most unfairly in popular music, but they do. But this is a rather good joke, I think, anyway. I'll probably, make a mess of it, but there we are. But it was told to me by a drummer. A drummer and a guitarist are having a conversation. And the drummer says, oh, I bet it's really easy playing the guitar. And the guitarist said, well, it's probably pretty easy playing the drums. He said, I'll tell you what, you go away and buy a guitar and practice for a couple of weeks, and I'll go away and buy a drum kit and practice for a couple of weeks, and we'll come back together and we'll see who can play what. All right, said the drummer. So the guitarist goes into the shop and he orders the drum kit and a hi-hat and cymbals and sticks and brushes. And he comes away well pleased. And the drummer goes into the shop and he says, I want an electric guitar. And the man says, you're a drummer, aren't you? And he said, yeah, why? He said, this is a fish and chip shop. Most unfair to drummers, but there we are. The Boys and the Band, every word of it's true. Oh, we are the boys who make all the noise before the show's about to begin. Oh, we are the lads, the jokers and cads, whose diet is a riot of Dubonnet and gin. Oh, we are the flute, the saxes, trumpets, double bass, and piano and drums all sat on our bums, for we are the boys in the band. First in the bar, ha 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 ha, whenever there's a break in the show. We worry MDs, we've all got DTs. We're always late arriving and the first ones to go. Though we know the score, we like to score more. With chorus girls who soon understand. We may be the dregs, but we know about legs, for we are the boys in the band. Squash into the pit, we have to rough it. On occasions, we've been known to fluff it. We just tell the flipping cast to stuff it. Play another chorus ready till I've got the bottles ready. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Do me so do. We're making more dough than all the prima donnas in the cast. Move it along, rip through the song. There's nothing like a tango when you play it too fast. We are the bugs, the fonders and jugs. We always knock our parts off the stand. Whoops, sorry. So pass us the cig and on with the gig. For we are the boys in the playing with toys in the. We are the boys in the band. Take it! Encore! What a long night this could be, ladies and gentlemen. This is called Vamped Already. Ready! We are the crowd who play far too loud. We never give the singers a chance. We never stay with them, we lose every rhythm. And yesterday the drummer threw up during the dance. Name any key, we only know 3. We never play with more than one hand. Yoo-hoo! We're on pleasure bent, so bugger the tempo. We are the boys and the boisterous joys in the. We are the boys in the band. Take it! The boys in the band. Speaking of bands, through the 1990s and into the 2000s, I used to play with a band called the Mardi Gras Jazz Band. We used to do weddings and parties and that sort of thing. And their music was largely sort of trad and sort of Dixie and stuff, which isn't particularly my jazz thing, really. But it was fun to do. And they were a cracking group of musicians. And we had the band, as usual in these bands, led by the trumpeter. And the trumpeter would step forward and he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to play a number called," and announce the numbers. What he used to do was, in fact, not announce the number. He used to say, "We're now going to play a number called," and then he'd turn around and point to any member of the band. And you had to be ready, in that everybody on their bandstand had a list of silly song titles. And so it would nothing to do with the number we're going to play, nothing to do with the number at all. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a little number called," and you point, and somebody would say, "Get your feet off the table, father, and give the cheese a chance. Get out the meatballs, mother, we're coming to a fork in the road. Put down the jukebox, granny, you're too old to carry a tune." And this one, which I particularly liked, "Get off the oven, grandma, you're too old to ride the range." And I don't know why, this kind of like triggered something in my brain, and a silly song came out of it. He was down on his luck, he was on his last buck, as he rode into town around noon. He came down the main drag and he tethered his nag right outside the old whiskey saloon. In the bar there was foul noise, there was gambling and cowboys, wild women and song and Butch Cassidy. But he silenced their roar as he stepped across the floor, and he leapt on the stage and said placidly, "I've come to tune the piano. Don't nobody stop me no how. From here to Wells Fargo, in every bar go them loused up pianos, if you'll pardon my argot. I've come to tune the piano. I've only one chance and I'll grab it. From Cheyenne to Denver, it's me the bass sent fur. So Joe, let the dog see the rabbit." As he pushed Joe aside, the bar door opened wide, and there stood the bandit, Mad Ned. Folks started to quail, Gary Cooper turned pale, and the Cisco Kid hit as Ned said, "Don't no one tune the piano. Don't no one touch it no how. You'll make old Joe's Haxwell, he don't play it that well. For all he's the grandson of Winifred Atwell. Don't no one tune the piano. Folks like it round here out of tune. I'll gun you the next time you touches that Bechstein, right here in the whiskey saloon." Then Ned went for his gun, but the tuner had none, and John Wayne said, "You ain't having mine, the bitch." So the tuner took up his stand, and by raising his hand with his tuning fork, made a rude sign. But Ned beat him to it. He was fast as James Stewart, and he shot that man down like a beast would. The tuner was dead, and the last words he said were, "Gold darn, I've been shot," called Lee Marvin. That's why no one don't tune the piano. In westerns, not never know how. If you watch the complete flick, you'll see it's a neat trick to disguise the singing of Marlene Dietrich. No one don't tune the piano. It's something of which they've not heard. Now guitars that are dodgy get fixed by Roy Rogge. And there's no cause to be hung if your fiddle's been restrung, but a man do get uptight if you touches his upright. So a tuner they shoots in cold blood. Thinking. In about 1992, I started to be the pianist for Barry Cryer's show. And we went out on the road, and we still go out on the road and still do it. But it meant that I had to find some some solo songs, because Baz needed to have a bit of a break in the middle of each act. So it was beholden to me to come up with something. So I thought maybe I'd start doing a sort of family album of songs. So I thought let's kind of start off perhaps with Grandfather. So pinching a well-known tune on this occasion, this is called Grandpa's Bath Night. On his birthday, Grandfather said that he would really rather have a bath with foamy lava, 'cause he was 82 when he came home from the pub. He sat naked in the tub, and we gave his back a scrub, 'cause he was 82. And he looked down at his toes and he said, "Hello, toes, every one of you knows that you are 82. Then he looked down at his knees and he said, "Hello, knees, believe it if you please that you are 82. Then he looked higher yet and he said with deep regret, "And you, my little pet, if you'd lived, you'd have been 82. That was based on a joke which I heard from Peter John, with whom I performed in a lot of music halls, and I hope Peter won't mind me stealing it and making it into a song. But I did think that using a joke as the basis for a comedy song was quite a good idea. So I thought, I've done Grandpa, let's do Granny, okay? So I thought, I need a joke about Granny, make it into a song. See, easy formula. Not so. I have the joke. I've had this joke for years. I have not yet made it into the song that I should have made it into. Maybe somebody out there could do it for me. Anyway, I'll give you the joke, okay? This is the joke. It's Granny's birthday as well, tomorrow. She's going to be 80. So Mum says to Granny, she says, "Would you like a cake?" "Oh, yes, please." "Right, would you like icing?" "Oh, yes, please." "Would you like candles?" "Oh, yes, please," says Granny. "And," says Granny, "I'd like some of those little silver balls on the top of the cake, all right?" So Mum says, "Yes, certainly." So anyway, gets to the evening, Granny goes to bed. Mum stays up, makes the cake. Lovely cake, ices it, candles on top, all ready for tomorrow. Then she's, "Oh, goodness me," she thinks, "I've got none of those little silver balls to put on the top." So little Johnny says, "Mum, don't worry." He said, "I have got some ball bearings in the wheel of my bike. We could take those out, give them a clean up, put them on top. Granny will never know." And Mum thinks, "Oh dear, well, needs must where the devil drives, you know." So Johnny takes the wheel off, gets the ball bearings out, pretty pattern. And that's that. Next afternoon, it's tea time, and they bring in the cake and the candles, and Granny blows out the candles. And on the top, she's so pleased to see the little silver balls. So she cuts herself a big slice of cake. And everybody's watching and a bit worried because it's got a lot of silver balls on the top of it. But she eats it, goes down all right, and she's absolutely fine. The next morning, Granny comes down first. She goes into the front room, and she bends down to poke the grate. She breaks wind and shoots the cat. That's as far as I got with that one. We have a lot of friends and indeed a lot of relatives in France. Hello, people in France. This is a little French offering for you. A little French snail woke up in the garden one morning. It was a lovely sunny morning. The sky was blue. The birds were singing. And the little French snail looked across the lawn and he saw his own true love. And he thought he would go to her. And as he moved through the grass, the little French snail sang, "Chanson d'amour." And the lawnmower went rat-ta-ta-ta-ta. Cruel, but there we are. I'm going to leave the piano for a little bit now, which will probably be a relief to you all. Talk a little bit about I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue and my sort of relationship with it. I joined it in 1975. They did the pianist in 72. Two series followed that in 73, 74. I joined in 1975. The producer at the time was Simon Brett. I'm still amazed to this day that he got me into it. He just seen me do stuff up on the Edinburgh Fringe. I'm still there. So thank you, Simon. Whether he's regretted it since or not, I don't know. I had to, of course, accompany people doing these songs, and not always very easy. And people have said to me, "Gosh, you can accompany anybody doing anything." No, I can't actually. But for I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, I was blessed with a training I had really in sort of the 1970s and 80s, which was playing a great deal for old-time music hall. Music hall is difficult stuff. It's not difficult stuff musically, but it's difficult to accompany because a lot of stopping and starting, you know, and you've really got to follow the singers. And we had I worked with some very, very good singers. Very, very good performers indeed. People who would do music hall if they weren't doing anything else, as it were. So I worked with people in the West End, people who've been in musicals, straight actors, people from television. So I worked with people like Patricia Michael, Leonard Fenton, Colette Kelly, Peter John, who I mentioned just now. So I was very, very lucky. And of course, you had to get it right. You didn't want to tread on their jokes or tread on their sort of more delicate romantic moments in their songs. So that's kind of helped me really playing for Clue. Of course, then you have people like dear Jeremy Hardy, who, of course, was not a great singer at all. But at least Jeremy had no fear of it. He would just get up there and give it his best shot. And you had to kind of guess really where he was going to go next. And when we had Linda Smith on the show, she was very funny because she, just before she sang for the first time, she said, "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I must warn you." She said, "I'm no Jeremy Hardy." She's a very funny lady. I remember her saying a lovely line. She said, "I went out and bought an album of whale music to help me relax. And I was very disappointed," she said, "because when I got it home, I found it was a dolphin tribute band." Hump, as I said, was the chairman for, of course, until we lost him in 2008. And he and I got on very well because of the jazz interest. I'm a bit of a jazz fan, and he, of course, was encyclopedic about jazz. And so if we had the chance, we'd sit down in a quiet dressing room somewhere and just talk about jazz and jazz musicians, because he knew them all. He was great. But between him and Jack D, over the years, I've received many insults during the show. People say, "Oh, how cruel they are to you. How nasty they are." And I say, no, it's great. It's great. I love having those insults because it keeps my name out there. And it also means if they're telling me what a bad pianist I am, it also means if I make a mistake, it doesn't really matter because I'm not meant to be a great pianist anyway. So lovely lines like, "Oh, Colin still has perfect pitch. So if anybody's got a small garage roof that needs repairing," Colin Sell's music has a strong Middle Eastern influence, mainly Shiite. Colin Sell's playing once made a blind man deaf, and so on. If you want to know, there's a website out there with all of these. And from I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, there have been over the years many spin-offs. I think people thought if you can play for that, you can play for anything. One of the biggest spin-offs was Barry Cryer and Willie Rushton getting together to do a stage show called Two Old Farts in the Night. Now, Willie Rushton, splendid chap altogether, he did not like rehearsing. So what he used to do in Two Old Farts in the Night was he'd let Barry come on first and do all his jokes and do his shtick, as it were, and then Willie would come on afterwards. So the whole thing was like a sort of chessboard, really, of Barry and Willie and Barry and Willie, then a song and then whatever. So also, like B. Lillie, Willie had no fear at all of an audience. So one occasion we were playing Douglas in the Isle of Man, right? And Barry had been on and done about 10 minutes, warming up the audience, being very funny, telling some cracking jokes, and they were all roaring with laughter. And Willie strolled on, and he beamed at this audience, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, as Oscar Wilde said, "it's great to be in Douglas." And Barry and I thought this could be very embarrassing, but not at all. The audience thoroughly enjoyed it, and they gave him a great big round of applause. I thought it was very funny. He had that ability, Willie, to insult people and for them to enjoy it. We went to Andover, and when we arrived, the piano was being tuned, and the piano tuner was blind, very good hearing and so on. And he was tuning away, and when he finished, instead of going off, he came and talked to us in the dressing room, which was all right, except he was a little bit sort of insistent and a bit tedious, to be honest. And he had his guide dog with him, of course. And eventually, at about quarter of an hour before curtain up, he said, "Well, gentlemen, I'll leave you to it then." And he took up the lead of his guide dog and walked to the door. And as he got to the door, Willie said, "How cruel of them to give you a cat." And again, Barry and I thought, oh gosh, what a terrible thing to say. But not at all. The man roared with laughter, and he's probably still dining out on it, actually. He probably thought, this is great. Willie Rushton insulted me. What a privilege. Willie's angle doing Two Old Farts in the Night was that he couldn't tell jokes. So he would come on and say, "That's old Bazza telling jokes." He said, "I can't tell jokes. I can't remember them," he said. "It's a medical condition. Doctors call it quipslexia. I can remember perfectly well the joke takes place in a pub, and there's a conversation between a traveling salesman and a gorilla. But where the charabanc load of Belgian nuns comes into it, I can't possibly remember." That was Willie. Charabanc load of Belgian nuns. It's a fantastic flight of fancy. It was just brilliant. And then, of course, he did tell the odd joke. "What is the difference?" he asked the audience. "What is the difference between erotic and kinky?" Erotic is when you do something beautiful and lingering and sensual to your partner with a single feather. And kinky is when you use the whole chicken. Great stuff. "I was in a hotel room," he said on one occasion. "I was in a hotel room and there was a sign on the wall that said, 'Breakfast at any time.' So I phoned up reception and I ordered poached eggs on toast during the Renaissance." Following the start of doing Two Old Farts in the Night in 1991. In 1992, Barry Cryer started doing his own one-man show, which was a great fun to do as well. And he's still doing it. As I say, he's still going strong, and he's an absolute joy to work with. He has that ability to just walk onto a stage and you just feel waves of warmth coming off from the audience. It's something you can't teach people. He is just very likable, and people like him, and they're very happy to sit there. He does 2 hours, and he's absolutely fantastic. Long may it continue. I thoroughly enjoy playing for him. I also worked with Lillie Morris, the Canadian singer. She did a whole set of songs of Edith Piaf's. Edith Piaf, of course, was diminutive. She was about 4'11" and very slight of build. How to put this kindly, Libby wasn't. She was very tall and quite broad, but my goodness, she could put those songs across. It was fantastic playing for her. Wonderful. I did a few shows also with Dora Bryan. These also came out of doing I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, because she'd heard me do I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. And she was great to work with as well, because she had wonderful energy. She was in her 60s at the time. She used to say to the audience, "I bet you want to know how old I am. Well, I'm 60 several." And then she'd say, "When I was a little girl, I said to my mum, when I grow up, I want to be an actress." And she said, "You can't do both." But she looked wonderful. She had, still the blue eyes and the perfect figure and the sort of course, the golden curls and so on. But she was lovely to work with. I also worked with Sheila Stiefel towards the end of her life. Very, very sorry to lose her. Smashing performer. And she could only do what Sheila Stiefel did. She only had to sort of raise an eyebrow or quiver her lip or something, and she had the whole audience in hysterics. Brilliant stuff. About 3 or 4 years ago, I got into playing for silent films. This seems to come back now as a sort of a popular pastime, and audiences are building steadily, and great fun it is to do as well. You just have to pray that something in your brain will feed your fingers so you can come up with something to accompany this particular sequence of the film. So you mustn't take your eye off the screen. Very dangerous. I think the greatest fear for anybody playing for silent film is when you get an intertitle that comes up and says, "And then they played the Romanian national anthem." Now, that's all very well if you know the Romanian national anthem, but of course you probably don't. So you can come up with something. Or something like that. You can kind of make that work all right. But, of course, at the end of the film, somebody's going to come up to you and say, "That is not the Romanian national anthem," which, of course, your cover is then blown. There's a lovely story that Andre Previn tells about his uncle. His uncle used to play for silent film in America. And he was playing for a film one day in something like the early 20s. And it was quite an avant-garde film. And it had sequences of a very debauched party in contemporary Manhattan, and then scenes from the life of Christ. And so he really had to keep his eye on the screen, going from music for the debauched party and music for scenes from the life of Christ. And at one point, he made the mistake of taking his eye off the screen. And the next thing he knew was that he was being frog-marched out of the cinema by the cinema manager because he'd managed to play the black and white rag all through the crucifixion. A lesson for us all there somewhere, I think. In 1979, I was asked to play for the gala night of the reopening of the Lyric Theatre Hammersmith. And again, I think I probably got this off the back of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue as well, because I had to play for lots of different people doing lots of very, very different songs. And I was pretty privileged on this occasion to play for people like Elizabeth Welsh, Erlyn Hall, Joan Heel and so on. And also in the show was Richard Goulden. Now, Richard Goulden was known in the business as Moley, because every year from 1930 and through, in fact, until 1980, for 50 years, he played Mole in Toad of Toad Hall, which started off being played every year at the Lyric Hammersmith, and then I think it moved to other theatres in London. And he was a delightful little man, very twinkly, glasses, very, very short, and I hadn't met him before. So I was delighted to meet him, and I said, "Well, Mr. Goulden," I said, what song are you going to do, And he said, "I'm not going to do a song." I said, "Oh," he said, "No." He said, "I'm going to do a monologue." I said, all right, fine. I said, well, would you like some music to play you on? He said, well, normally, so I get played on to Little Man, You've Had a Busy Day. So it all kind of went like this. And this is the monologue that he did. I don't know if he wrote it. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe somebody out there can tell me. But it's a delightful little piece. I'm a peaceful sort of person, and my manners meek and mild. In fact, I have the nature of a happy, laughing child. But sometimes people make me cross and get me in a state. When that occurs, I act at once. I never hesitate. I murder them. I bump them off. I quietly do them in. I cut their thread. I quench their spark. It really seems a sin to let them go on living, to annoy my peaceful days. So as I say, I murder them in various clever ways. So I've got a few confessions that I feel I ought to make, and I'll break them to you gently for everybody's sake. The first about my laundress, who has left this world of strife. If you listen, I will tell you how she came to lose her life. I murdered her last Tuesday. I really thought it best. And never, ever more will she tear buttons off my vest. And now I'll get my Sunday shirts and collars in one piece. So I murdered her last Tuesday. It's a merciful release. A terrible misfortune has befallen our family. My poor wife's mother has gone off into eternity. She used to give me lectures. She won't do that again. She said my conduct pained her, so I put her out of pain. 'Twas on a summer's evening the dreadful deed was done. No talk or fuss about it, just a bullet from a gun. She never seemed contented, so I thought 'twas time she went. So I murdered her one evening. It was very kindly meant. I rented some apartments in a very quiet street. The cooking was delicious and the landlady was sweet. But she had a horrid little boy with curls upon his brow. She used to call him Clarence. She calls him nothing now. I murdered him one evening. I thought his time was up. And afterwards, I took his charming mother out to sup. She little thought, while eating the most expensive fruit, that I'd murdered little Clarence in his purple velvet suit. That was Richard Gordon. Now, forgive me for coming back to Willie Rushton again, but Richard Gordon, of course, had this gig every year. He had this spot every year when he knew he'd be working as an actor. He may have been out of work the rest of the year. In fact, I don't think he was. He kept very busy. But he might have been out of work, but he knew he had that little rock of work at Christmas. And Willie Rushton was in much the same position. He used to be in Treasure Island for many years running at the Mermaid Theatre in Blackfriars, which was owned and run by and usually starred Bernard Miles. And Willie, as I said earlier on, didn't like rehearsing very much, so this suited him very well. He just turned up, I think, probably just for the dress rehearsal, and he used to play Squire Trelawney. And on this particular occasion, he's on stage and he's opposite the man playing Dr. Livesey, a fine old actor called Eric Flynn. On this particular night, Willie, as usual, and I suffered from this a great deal when I was accompanying him on stage. He wasn't concentrating very well. So it was his job as Squire Trelawney to set up Long John Silver, who's waiting in the wings, Bernard Miles, you see. And this is quite early in the play. And so he launches into this whole thing about Long John Silver. Oh, Long John Silver, pirate of the high seas, used to be a ship's cook, now scourge of the Spanish main, devil of a man with a cutlass and a parrot on his shoulder. And he knew there was something else, and that he couldn't remember what it was. And there was a pause. And Eric Flynn gave him one of the great all-time prompts. He said, this Long John Silver, he said, how many legs has he got? And Willie said, you being a medical man, you'll be interested to know that he's only got the one. Willie used to tell that story against himself. Dear Willie, I miss him greatly. We lost him in 1996. Terrible shame. And of course, we lost Humph in 2008. And now we've just lost Tim Brooke Taylor, which is also just shattering. All I can say is really that even if you haven't enjoyed the last hour, perhaps just in memory of Tim, or indeed in memory of anybody else whom you know, who you've lost to this awful virus, perhaps you put your hands in your pockets and give to the COVID-19 emergency appeal. I'll leave that to you anyway. Right, now, the moment we've all been waiting for. This is the grand finale, ladies and gentlemen. This is the interactive bit. Yes, interactive. So it's where you get to join in as well. Now, somewhere on your screen, hopefully there will appear the lyrics for an old music hall song called Where Did You Get That Hat? Okay. And if you can't see them on the screen, perhaps you could call them up on your phone or something. Where did you get that hat? And it's something which I'm now going to play, and something with which I hope you're going to join in. Yes, Cole, we will. Yes, Cole, we will. Right, I'll do it through twice so you get the idea of it. And it goes like this. Where did you get that hat? Where did you get that tile? Isn't it a knobby one and just the proper style? I should like to have one just the same as that. Where'er I go, they shout hello. Where did you get that hat? All together. Where did you get that hat? Where did you get that tile? Isn't it a knobby one and just the proper style? I should like to have one just the same as that. Where'er I go, they shout hello. Where did you get that hat? Have you all got that? Yes, Cole. Yes, Cole. Good. Because now I'm going to confuse you. We're going to play a game we play on I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. And it's called One Song to the Tune of Another. So we're going to take the words of Where Did You Get That Hat? And we're going to sing them to the tune of the Dam Busters March. Oh, yes. This is something that I worked out some years ago, and we used it on the show, and it worked wonderfully. And I've been very proud of this ever since. So here we go. I'll play it through twice. First time, listen to me do it, and then join in the second chorus and really raise the roof. Annoy the rest of your family. Annoy the neighbours. Annoy everybody out in the street as well. Here we go. Where did you get that hat? Where did you get that tile? Isn't it a knobby one and just the proper style? I should like to have one just the same as that. Where'er I go, they shout, hello, where did you get that hat? All together now. Where did you get that hat? Where did you get that tile? Isn't it a knobby one and just the proper style? I should like to have one just the same as that. Wherever I go, they shout, hello, where did you get that hat? Well, I hope that worked for you. It certainly worked for me. If you have been, thank you so much for watching. Please take care, stay safe, stay alert, and if possible, let's all keep laughing. Thank you. Good night.